G'day, I'm Ted Jedynak, podiatrist and international educator of health practitioners and manual therapies, helping you get better results clinically and commercially. I'm really excited about this opportunity that I have for you today because you're going to get some key practical tips that'll help you in your sporting footwear recommendations immediately. Earlier this week, a local athlete's foot store had a get-together with some of the company reps from the shoe companies. Now, there are a number of podiatrists in attendance there, and what caught my eye was the way they were checking out the new shoes that were being promoted. And it got me thinking, what would be a useful, rigorous way to check out sporting footwear? I mean, bending and twisting shoes in my hands hardly seemed like a rigorous scientific approach. So, given my penchant for cooperative learning, I thought I would pose some questions to my friend and colleague Simon Bartold, who does have some experience with sporting footwear. So, Simon, thank you for taking my call.
My absolute pleasure, Ted, and welcome everybody.
Good to have you on board. Now, for those of you who don't know Simon, he is a classic pointy head who thrives on research and all things academic when it comes to sport, biomechanics and sporting footwear. Simon spent over 20 years working for ASICS and is currently based in France as the manager of global footwear specialist program. So, yeah, I reckon he'll have some insights for us on the subject of sporting footwear. Look, from a practical perspective, I want to know the most useful way for me as a clinician to determine how to best assess footwear for my patients. So, Simon, I'd like to start with this question. What are the top 3 mistakes that practitioners make when they're checking out footwear? Like if there's a new release of shoes, what are the things that we do as clinicians that we shouldn't, and how can we do things better?
This is an excellent question, Ted. So basically, what you've just asked me, what are the top 3 things that drive me crazy? And I just need to make a point of order here that I'm in France. I'm not working for ASICS. I haven't done for quite some time.
Yep.
I'm going to give my wonderful new company Salomon a plug, and so we're here in the Alps having a great time, and we're looking at some really great running footwear. So I just want to clarify that. All right, so the top 3 things that drive me crazy that I see in both retail and also amongst my clinical peers. Number 1 thing that drives me crazy is when people get a shoe and they grab it by the forefoot and the rear foot and they bend it in half through the middle of the shoe. Okay, and they're testing for the mid portion of the shoe flexibility. What they've just done is they have immediately broken the shoe. And that shoe will never be the same again. They've busted it.
What do you mean broken
what you have to consider? Yeah, they've busted it. $200 shoe. So what you've got to consider is, why the hell would you do that? Does your foot bend there? No, it doesn't. It doesn't bend there. So why would you try to bend the shoe there? Because it's not relevant.
Okay.
So that, I think you got to think about that. So why would you do that? The second thing that drives me crazy is when people pay too much attention to the heel counter. What we need to know is that the heel counter is a bit of an industry con. It's been around since the early 70s, and its purported use is to try to stabilize the rear foot as an antipronation device. Now, as you may know, Ted, I hate this term antipronation device for a number of reasons we won't go into, but basically I could very easily demonstrate to you that if we cut a little window in the back of the shoe through the heel counter, that foot is still going to be doing exactly what it would do in a barefoot state inside the shoe. In other words, if it pronates, it's still going to pronate within the shoe, and the heel counter ain't going to make a scrap of difference to it. So I'm starting a movement called the Ditch the Heel Counter movement, because I don't believe it's a very important part of the shoe at all, excepting maybe to give the upper a bit of structure and fit.
Okay.
Now,
just before you go,
thing that drives me,
just before you go into the third one, let me just explore this heel counter concept a little bit with you. Is the development of the heel counter as a reinforcement to control the level of subtalar pronation, did that come about because of the power of the root theory of foot function? Like, is the timing similar as far as in the 70s when that theory came about?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if we look at the chronology of the development of running footwear, I mean, it's a reasonably recent development. You know, we're talking about the mid 70s.
Yeah.
You know, so we're talking about the time of very tight shorts and afros, and because of that, there was a lot of attention paid to so-called biomechanics, and the only reference point people had back then was the work of Root, and O'Ryan. In other words, podiatric biomechanics, which was a theory, not a fact.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, all the research from that era was looking at how you might control pronation. Now, I'm going to go on record here now, as I have many times, and say you cannot control pronation. You can't do it with an orthotic, and you can't do it with a shoe.
Wow.
You can change some of the forces, you can change some of the loads, but you can't control it. So all of these, the shoe industry embraced this, and they said, yeah, you know, what we need to do is build these shoes that are what I like to call brick technology. In other words, they're built like a brick, very stiff, very rigid, huge heel counters, massive polyurethane bars through the midfoot, dual density midsoles. All of these things were actually ticking the boxes for the anti-pronation protocols.
Yes.
What we now know in 2015 is that none of those things work.
Mm-hmm.
Most of those things are counterproductive. They all add weight to the shoe. And if there's one take-home message for the people listening today, it is weight is the great enemy of the athlete, of the runner.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all, unfortunately, are subjected to the laws of physics,
Yes.
which become far more important as you get older. And that is force equals mass times acceleration. So if you've got a mass being accelerated on a lever arm, namely your leg, the more mass you've got, in other words, the more shoe you've got, the more force you've got.
Yes.
So we're in this whole new area where we're focusing on much less shoe that's much more flexible, that's much lighter and much more responsive, and that's the exact opposite of what we were dealing with through the 80s, 90s, and even the early 2000s.
Oh, so does that mean you're a supporter of barefoot running footwear? It's lighter, it's more flexible. Is that where you're heading?
Well, first of all, if I was in the studio with you now, I'd slap you on the back of the head for saying barefoot running footwear, because that's obviously an oxymoron.
Okay, cool. Oh, the benefits
if you
of
want
distance.
to say barefoot running or minimalism, I'll say to you, I've never, ever said don't do it. I've just said it's not for everybody and don't do it all the time.
Yep, okay. Oh, okay. Number 3, what's the thing that really gets under your goats? You've got 1 and 2. What was number 3?
Yeah, so I think the other thing where people are testing shoes, I think, you know, to torque the shoe, in other words, to twist it from side to side and to you know, arch the eyebrow and have a sage look on one's face whilst doing that, it doesn't really tell us a hell of a lot about the shoe. And because we've got a global trend towards more flexible footwear, you're always going to see a lot more torque going through the shoe. And that doesn't at all mean the shoe won't perform superbly. It doesn't mean that it won't be able to offer a very nice, stable platform for the athlete to run. So I just think that's a test that probably, you know, we should be using either judiciously or not at all.
Okay, so then as a clinician, what recommendations would you have? How do we go about prescribing or recommending shoes for our patients? Do you have a guideline for that?
Yes, I do. I think that the first thing I'd do is and this is a very difficult thing to do, but I'd like practitioners and also the athletic footwear companies and the running press to immediately dismantle the categorization of footwear. And by that I mean, at the moment we have this historic categorization where a shoe is either motion control, and
Yes.
over the internet here I'm doing this with Austin Power exclamation marks. It's either motion control, it's either neutral or cushioning category, and a lot of companies have different variations of that, but that's the basis.
Yes. Okay.
What we know from the research is that you can take a pronated foot and put it in a motion control shoe and it won't work.
Okay.
So in other words, you cannot. The research tells us that repeatedly you can take a foot type and you can put it in the shoe that the manufacturers are recommending for that foot type and it won't do anything at all. So what that's telling me is that this is far more about trying to understand how the shoe interacts with the foot in a far more meaningful way, and trying to understand that the thing that drives all motion is not a shoe, it's actually your brain. Mm-hmm. And what we have to do is we have to try to figure out how the importance of filtering signals from the foot to the brain and how the shoe interferes with that, or how the shoe affects that. So what the general movement now, and the reason that the new big category is lightweight, is because, as I've said, we want to reduce the weight, but also we're getting much better transmission of signals from the foot to the brain, so that you can interpret things like the surface you're running on, the hardness of it. We understand that there's an inverse relationship here. If you've got a harder surface, you decrease your lower limb stiffness. So in other words, you make it a more compliant spring, and if it's a softer surface, you increase your lower limb stiffness, so you make it a tighter spring. So the brain interprets all that and changes. We also need to think about the geometry of the shoes. So can just simply by manipulating the way a shoe decouples or deforms, can you allow the foot to move in a more meaningful and better fashion? And the answer is almost certainly yes, you can.
Okay.
So we've really moved away from that whole concept of rigidity, blocking techniques, antipronation protocols. All those sort of things are very, very old hat now and have been for many, many years. And we're moving into a much more exciting era. So I guess a long answer to the question, what do you recommend for your athletes? Well, the most important thing you can do is have a look at their dynamic function. We've talked about that. So make sure you understand where the deficit lies. And then perhaps the single most important message I can give them is it's not so much about making a shoe choice based on, does it control the athlete? Does it cushion the athlete? We want the athlete to be changing the surface they run on, changing the terrain they run on, change the shoe they run in, and mix up the way they run. So this whole concept of mixing up your training is an incredibly important injury prevention technique.
Yes.
The issue with running, and the reason that 70% or greater of all runners get injured, is not because of any other thing other than you're imparting an accumulative, repetitive load, and the body hates repetitive, cumulative load. So you can imagine that most people are time poor. They live in New York, they run through Manhattan, they do the same route all the time to get their run in, and it's very repetitive.
Yes.
If they just vary that by going on a different route or going for a run through Central Park or trying to find a little light trail to run on, and they mix it up with some interval training in a different shoe, so shorter, faster training in a lighter, more flexible shoe, and they get onto a different surface, and Lord help them if they, one day and two they don't run, but they jump on their bike or they go walking or they go and play lawn bowls or whatever they want to do.
Yes.
But they allow the system's time to recover. Then you're starting to have very smart training protocols that are less likely to injure them.
Nice. Hey, I've just had a flash that I reckon you might have even referred to some research that showed shoe comfort and the role that it played in injury reduction. Is that right? Or am I making that up?
Yeah, that is. No, you're not making that up at all. That's been quite a vibrant area of interest, and there's been a number of different people who've looked at that.
Okay.
German biomechanist by the name of Anna Minderman and her boss, a fairly famous bloke called Benno Nig. In Australia, a bloke called Bill Vincenzino,
Nice.
research physio up in Queensland, has been quite involved in all of this area. And basically they all agree that you can have all the bells and whistles and all the fruit salad in a shoe, and if you put that thing on and it's not comfortable, it ain't going to work. Conversely, you can have a shoe that's very simple, and if it's very comfortable, then it is likely to have a radical influence on whether or not you get injured. So this is very interesting. So it's not measurable. So it's only subjective comfort. So the only way you can measure it is with things like a questionnaire or a visual analog scale.
Yes.
But it's actually been repeatedly shown that if you have a shoe that's comfortable, it's going to perform much better. And I actually had a chat. I actually did a podcast with Benno Nig only a year or so ago, and we wrapped it up. I said to him, Benno, what's the most important thing in running footwear? And he just said one word: comfort. That's it.
Huh. All right, well, that's easy. So we can send our patients, our clients off to the shoe store, just make sure it's comfortable. All right.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. But if you're sending them up to the shoe store, the take-home message is don't just be conned into getting into the sales assistant's favourite shoe,
Yes.
or the company that's given them the biggest financial incentive for the month. You want to be trying on several pairs of shoes. that are all within a similar category, and the one that feels the best is the one that's going to be best for you. That's the strategy I'd be using.
Beautiful. Hey, tell me, something else I recall hearing you say is that there's no such thing as a straight lasted shoe or a curved lasted shoe. Is that the case?
That's absolutely the case. Yep, that is a complete myth within the running shoe industry. So all running footwear from every company in the world that's ever made a shoe, they all come off normally one last. And so in other words, the last is the plastic or in the old days wooden model that the shoe is made from.
Yes.
So the last is what determines the shape. So there is one last, and then the way they change the appearance of the shoe to make it look more curved or more straight is simply to either sculpt the midsole, so in other words, to take a big chunk out of the medial side of the shoe, or to dam that, to fill it in. So obviously, if you've filled it in, the shoe looks much straighter. If you've sculpted it, you've taken a large section away, the shoe looks much more curved.
Yeah.
But in fact, they're off the same last, and they're all straight, or maybe a little bit curved.
I've got to get a sound effect in here. Nice myth to bust and explode. Beautiful. Great. So top 3 points that get under your goats. Bending shoes in the middle, it breaks the shoes. The heel counter, ditch the heel counter movement. Oh, I can see a bumper sticker or a t-shirt coming up with that. And number 3, torque the shoe. So no another twisting. And point number 4 of the top 3 was about the comfort, making sure that the shoes are comfortable. And yes, making sure that also the dynamic function deficits are identified in the patient before. Just get off this idea of trying to control the movement or the directions, because, that whole concept of blocking or controlling motion, it just ain't going to cut it. Beautiful. All right, if you want to keep up with the latest developments and critically reviewed research on the foot and leg in sporting matters, then it's an absolute must to go to bartoldbiomechanics.com and join up if you haven't already. It's absolutely, as far as your ongoing education and professional development, an absolute must. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Until next time, serve with spirit, consult with care, and keep helping the health of humanity. And Simon, thank you very much for your generosity and wealth of education that you've provided today.
My absolute pleasure, Ted. It's been great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.